you very much, Professor Nara, for your kind introduction. It is a great pleasure to co-organize this kind of international workshop on what is creativity in cooperation with IQCAM, APCTP, and Hezbollah Foundation. We are also very pleased to pronounce that proceedings will be published through John Wiley in 2 years. It's a tentative title of Emergent and Hidden Dynamics. My talk consists of 4 parts. Starting from a brief overview, I will discuss problems of what is life in 3 different contexts. In the overview, I will mention how opposition, conflict, and contradictions can be driving forces of creativity. Last October, we organized the International and Interdisciplinary Symposium on What is Life. This is a part of continuous regulation of H. Yukawa's verse. The proceeding just appeared in this summer, which contained almost 30 original papers. Yukawa predicted the presence of new kind of elementary particles called mesons, by which he became the first Nobel Prize winner as Japanese. Then, Yukawa Institute was developed at Kyoto University in 1950s. This October, Professor Toshihide Masukawa became another Nobel Prize winner with 3 other Japanese. He is a former director of Yukawa Institute. This is a great moment in understanding the problem on what is creativity. It is a Niels Bohr's complementarity principle that must be a revolutionary concept in modern physics. From a classical theory, particular phenomena and wave phenomena are mutually contradictory. From quantum theory, however, they are merely the different aspects of the same phenomenon. Let us consider the same diagram in different way. Suppose that there are known particles and a plausible unified theory, although there are some contradictions between them. Yukawa did not try to solve this contradiction. Yukawa did not try to modify unified theory, but instead he predicted quite unknown particles named mesons. Likewise, Masukawa predicted different elementary particles called quarks instead of challenging the unified theory. No matter how different are the details, complementarity can be a powerful tool for creativity. Complementarity has also attracted many artists as well because of its visual symmetry. Dutch artist Escher tried to demonstrate the complementarity based on understandable patterns. He first drew a single motif and its mirror image in order to fill out 2-dimensional space. If you are looking at red patterns, the surrounding blue ones are background, and vice versa. He then tried to demonstrate the double meanings of complementarity based on 2 motifs. One is optimist and another is pessimist. He finally tried to create the nature of infinity by making circles. Actually, 2 motifs are walking and meet at the center and shake hands with each other. This must be a supracomplementarity. Just like Escher tried to fill out the 2-dimensional space based on understandable patterns, scientists try to fill out the empirical space through the evolution of theories. This is a simple generalization of Niels Bohr's complementarity principle. I found this diagram from the book written by developmental psychologist Jean Piaget. He also tried to understand how we obtain the concept of number through our development. There is a critical period around 7 years old. Before this critical period, children knew only individual numbers less than 7. After this critical period, children suddenly acquired the knowledge of number, the concept of number based on complementarity of equality and inequality. What we acquired is not the knowledge of infinite numbers, but the constructive way how to define the infinite numbers. There must be common principles behind evolution and development in general. Along this line, perhaps, Professor Rambam will discuss the topics of developmental anomalies in more detailed context. When I complete this diagram and trace it logically, we may have three-dimensional spiral patterns between objective X world and subjective end system. I call this index circulation. There are two opposite planes denoted by yellow and red colors. Projecting three-dimensional features onto each plane, we may have two different patterns. In the Eastern world, many attractive patterns have been drawn again and again. They are called mandalas. Mandalas can be a symbol of complementarity. Mandala on this side is called Taizokai, which represents female. I think this corresponds to the vertical yellow plane of the previous slide. Psychologically, this represents the structure of unconsciousness. Mandala on the other side is called Kongotai, which represents male. I think this corresponds to the horizontal red frame of the previous slide. There are successive patterns in this symbol, which means that evolution and development can take place as time proceeds. So this mandala can represent the dynamical process of consciousness. Psychologist Carl Gustav Jung had been very interested in these mandalas because these are the powerful tools for curing psychologically ill persons. Connection of oppositions is his very famous word. Perhaps Professor Harold Atmanskat will give a talk about the role of unconsciousness in addition to the consciousness for creativity. And that circulation in my term may be a universal process among diverse life phenomena such as the origin of life, the present-day cellular processes, and even a pattern recognition of associated dots as a pattern of knock on the horse in this case through so-called closure, which is associated with exo-end transition. The successive alternate association and dissociation must be a powerful tool for creating new macromolecules. Professor Ludwig Reich made self-healing macromolecules through an inspiration of biomolecular architecture. Now go to the second part, where I will discuss creativity as the emergence of order out of chaos. There was a long-standing problem: how does the sperm flagella show regular propagation? It was well known that local sliding can generate local bending, although the underlying mechanism exceptions. Actually, in some fraudulent, two waves are propagating in opposite directions and do not annihilate on collision. In another long fraudulent, different sections show different wave frequencies with different wavelengths, leading to rather complex spatial-temporal irregularity. Starting from moment balance equation, we can derive fourth-order partial differential equations, although I will skip details in mathematics. For the theorems to slide back and forth, shear force capital S must be specified by the proposed double potentials with hysteresis switching functions. For vector considerations, I will introduce intra-subsystem conflicts by this symbol to represent opposed units. Second order and fourth order partial derivative terms represent nearest neighbor and next nearest neighbor interactions. Fourth order term can stabilize the system, whereas the second order term destabilizes it, leading to another sort of conflict represented by inter-subsystem conflicts using this symbol. In some fragment, as you can see, tip-to-base bend propagation can be observed, but the direction is suddenly reversed. Although the laser electrification was applied to dissect the fragment from the cell body, this is not important for the reversal of bend propagation. The computer simulation shows rightward bend propagation in response to a single stimulus applied at the left end. The resultant bends are bounded at both boundaries, leading to rather complex behavior. Such complex behavior resembles the motion of long fraudulent, as I mentioned before. Actually, two waves propagating in opposite directions can pass through on collision like solitons. The problem arose is how does the nature can control the intrinsic instability? One solution can be achieved by reducing the total length of the fragment. Then, as you can see, the model system shows rather regular patterns, although the direction is still reversed. So the remaining question is how can we control the direction as well? I suddenly realized that the fragment must not be the homogeneous system, but instead inhomogeneous structure. When I introduced a passive region of some critical length, then the model system shows regular best-tip bend propagation. From a point of view of theoretical physics, the resultant model system can be a type of hybrid dynamical systems with on and off state. From a point of view of metaphysics, intrinsic instability can be regulated by imposing supra-conflicts or trans-subsystem conflicts, in this case, represented by this symbol. In real fragment, generating rather regular best-tip bend propagation has inhomogeneous internal structure. Please remember, there are intra-subsystem conflicts, inter-subsystem conflicts, and trans-subsystem conflicts. When we combine all these symbols together, we have this whole pattern. Now, creativity can be understood as the emergence of order out of intrinsic chaos through a transition from exo in the form of opposed units to the end in the form of their synthesis. Now go to the third part, where I discuss creativity as the rediscovery of old concepts in new contexts. It is Charles Darwin's natural selection theory that has been rediscovered several times through the evolution of science. There are positions of life and death at the level of component. Charles Darwin tried to understand the origin of species in ecosystem. Almost 100 years later, biologist Barnett tried to understand the origin of new cells which can attack the invading antigen in immune system. Irrespective of the detailed scales, the common principle of natural selection can be rediscovered. Natural selection can be conducted by 3 steps. First, there is a pre-existing variability at the level of components such as organisms and cells. Second, they are encountered with environment. And finally, the adapted one shows proliferation. Surprisingly, after almost 20 years, the same mechanism can be rediscovered as the theory of cancer evolution. After another 20 years, I proposed the intracellular selection theory in order to understand Alzheimer's disease and prion disease. In non-dividing nerve cells, there are so many different kinds of proteins, some of which has 2 opposed conformations. One is normal, another is abnormal. When the abnormal protein has enzymatic ability to transform the normal one to the abnormal one, accumulation of denatured protein occurs, leading to the onset of prion disease or Alzheimer's disease. I suggested that such process may be conducted by natural selection. Cancer and Alzheimer's disease are the hallmark of aging, and both are microevolutionary processes. So, in the paper, I emphasize that seemingly opposite phenomena, aging and evolution, are very likely different aspects of the same biological process. This must be complementarity principle in biology. In other words, the same process has a double-edged sword. In addition, I emphasize that there is the scale invariant principle because the same principle of natural selection can be rediscovered at different contexts. From a point of view of meta-recognition, the process of rediscovery of Charles Darwin's natural selection can be understood through a transition from X worlds to N systems through the evolution of science. Interestingly, the similar pattern can be found about the acquisition of natural language. There are critical periods around 2 to 12 years old. During such critical period, we human beings can acquire the natural language. Noam Chomsky calls such intrinsic ability generative grammar. Professor Shigeru Miyagawa will discuss the linguistic system along this line. As an extension, Professor Adrian Chell will discuss the nature of communication through co-space of physical and virtual world. Now go to the final section where I will discuss creativity as the emergence of hidden dynamics with a double-edged sword. Beyond complementarity principle, Japanese philosopher Kitaro Nishida generated a concept of absolutely contradictory self-identity. As it is very important to take into account successive oppositions, we should never forget to consider about the entire opposition of wholeness. Then the total system must have quite self-singular structure. This concept is very important because we usually consider only ideal case. Of course, without any environmental pollution, for instance, about developmental psychology, children can do this kind of figures. But when the environmental pollution is present due to man-made chemicals, children never drew important but meaningful figures. This must be another inconvenient truth next to global warming. I Some are afraid that electromagnetic field pollution can be the additional problem of this environmental pollution. The upper panel shows Earth's natural electromagnetic fields. Please look at extremely low frequency fields. These fields contain much more complex patterns with several peaks whose wavelengths are in resonant relationship with Earth's size. Human brains, such as alpha, beta, and theta, are sharply separated by each peak, which means that our human brain activity partly influenced by the Earth's natural electromagnetic fields. At the present day, the lower panel shows continuous spectrum due to man-made electromagnetic fields, which must be superimposed on natural fields. There appeared a new disease called hypersensitivity, probably due to environmental pollution. William Lee is a medical doctor. He himself has a chemical sensitivity syndrome and wrote several books. And he reported another sensitivity due to electromagnetic fields. Actually, this person required shielding clothes to protect environmental fields. The causes and the underlying mechanism, unfortunately, are quite unclear. These are the hidden problems. To attack such hidden problems, we have to specify the fundamental signal transduction pathway. We human beings usually have almost 200 different kinds of cell types, such as nerve cell, muscle cell, immune cell, and so on. Despite diversity of such cell types and despite diversity of stimuli, the common signal transduction has been identified. For example, exogenous factors such as photon or photoran, or endogenous factors such as noradrenaline or acetylcholine, known as nerve transmitters, these can be stimulus for particular cell type. In addition, there are two different kinds of nonlinear, so-called nonlinear responsiveness. One is amplification, by which very weak stimulus can be amplified through several steps. Second is the transition from so-called exo to endo. I mean, from a straightforward linear signal transduction pathway to loop. This can be responsible for memory formation, as I will discuss below. Let us consider Pavlovian conditioning on associative memory formation. Generally, nerve cell shows acute responsiveness with non-genomic action in the time scale of the order of seconds up to minutes due to the ionic change around a membrane, cellular membrane. Now, when two different stimuli are applied precisely at some time intervals, what will happen after several trials? Nerve cell shows chronic responsiveness with genomic action by which signal transduction reaches a nucleus where the expression occurs. As a result, new protein is produced, which can translocate to the cellular membrane. Then the constitution of cellular membrane is the reconstitution of cellular membrane occurs. As a result, response transfer occurs from unconditioning to conditioning stimuli. The point is the transition from exo to endo system, as I mentioned before, and this must be the important point for associative memory formation. Then let us consider the second case. Suppose that a single stimulus applied twice instead of two different stimuli. what will happen? This is a resting state without any stimulus. The first stimulus can evoke the translocation of protein leading to normal responsiveness. If such translocated protein is stable enough for a while, the constitution of membrane is restored, leading to a memorized state. At this state, if the second stimulus is applied, the enhancement of responsiveness suddenly appears. I think this must be a sort of hypersensitivity. For example, this panel shows human brain wave recorded from 4 different sites. Light flashing at 10 Hz was applied only for 2 seconds. Even after turning off the stimulus, the brain wave started to synchronize, leading to a seizure of so-called photosensitive epilepsy. The important point, the same mechanism that is responsible for memory formation can now cause a seizure of photosensitive epilepsy. In other words, there must be a double-edged sword at the level of creativity. This is an important point. Now consider the side case. In this case, stimulus is present constantly, but with a very weak level. Instead of temporal change, what will happen? This is a normal response to the stimulus. But such normal response is not good for our health, like allergy due to cedar falling occurring in every stream. We may take medicine to protect such normal responsiveness. Then we may feel better because the normal responsiveness is inhibited. However, as long as the stimulus is present, another translocation can be triggered, leading to the restoring of normal responsiveness, which can be called cellular tolerance. What is worse, the activity of medicine is no longer stable enough. Then suddenly, another translocation can occur, leading to enhanced responsiveness. This must be another sort of hypersensitivity, although the stimulus pattern is completely different from previous case. Since we human beings have very complex internal structure, functional complexity, so quite different mechanisms can be predicted to account for hypersensitivity. We used to consider brain can respond to external stimuli, but this is not always the case. Brain can also respond to internal stimuli. Here again, we have the transition from linear to loop or so-called exoendocrine transition. Indeed, adrenal cortex produce hormone which inhibit the brain activity through blood circulation. So our brain activity is completely depending on body's activity. For instance, adrenal cortex is low, then the hormone level is low. Since very weak inhibition occurs at the level of brain, this leads to enhanced sensing of signals, leading to hypersensitivity, although the underlying mechanism is quite different from previous cases. On the contrary, when the adrenal cortex activity is high, since strong inhibition occurs at the level of brain, which goes to doing of the sense, known as Cushing's syndrome. So the role of adrenal cortex resembles the role of passive region of the flagellum. Now let us conclude my talk by this slide. I think that creativity must be the exo-end transition, no matter how different are the details in developed cases. 3 important features can be summarized. First, creativity Creativity may appear for both phenomena such as memory formation and hypersensitivity, although they can be defined as the emergence of hidden dynamics through the interplay between external stimuli and internal properties. Second, creativity can be found at various phenomena such as the acquisition of natural language, acquisition of number concept, and even breakthroughs in studies during development and or evolution of individuals and or science. Finally, creativity can be defined as the emergence of order out of intrinsic instability by imposing supra-conflicts, such as the passive region of the fragile. Nature can always escape from scientific and hence consciousness description. Meta-science or unconsciousness mind can compensate for such a lack of full description. I strongly hope that the present workshop will stimulate our discussions about advancement in our studies in the future. Thank you very much.